Welcome to the deep dive. So, you've sent over some really interesting stuff on large language models, or LLMs.
hmm
These AI powerhouses trained on just massive amounts of text. They're kind of the engine behind so much AI now.
Absolutely. And fascinating engines they are.
Yeah, and our focus today is really sharp. How do we actually, talk to these models effectively?
Right.
It boils down to this thing called prompt engineering.
Yeah.
Basically, the skill of giving them the right instructions.
Exactly. And the materials you shared, they really dig into how you craft those prompts, those instructions,
Sure.
and maybe just as vital, what these models can do, but also what they can't, their limits.
Right, limitations are key.
So our mission, let's say, for this deep dive is to equip you, the listener, with practical ways to write better prompts and maybe understand a bit more about what's going on under the hood.
Yeah, hopefully save you some time, maybe some frustration, and get you more insightful outputs in the end.
That's the plan.
Okay, let's get into it. So prompt engineering. At its core, it's about smart instructions right here.
Pretty much, giving the AI clear directions.
And your sources highlighted a few main ways. First up, instructional prompts. These are your direct commands, like summarize this text.
Yeah, pretty self-explanatory. Just tell it what to do.
Then there are contextual prompts. How do those work?
Well, think of it like setting the scene for the LLM. You provide background info.
Ah, okay.
To just summarize this, you might say, summarize this article about climate change impacts on coastal cities for an audience of policymakers. C, context.
Gotcha. So you're guiding it towards a more specific, relevant answer.
Exactly. More nuance.
And I really like the sound of role-based prompts. That's where you ask the LLM to act like someone specific.
You give it a persona, like act as a travel blogger and describe the best things to do in Tokyo.
That sounds like it could really change the tone and the style of the response.
Oh, definitely. It helps shape the language, the perspective it takes.
Now, how do we make sure these prompts are, well, clear? Your materials mention something called the PACT framework, although not in super detail, right?
Right. It wasn't deeply detailed in the sources, but it's a really useful concept. PACT. It stands for Purpose, Audience, Context, and Task.
Purpose, audience, context, task. Okay.
It's like a mental checklist before you write the prompt. What's the goal? Who's it for? What's the situation? And what precisely should the LLM do?
So thinking through those PCT elements helps you formulate a clearer prompt. Makes sense.
It really does. Big difference.
And beyond those basics, there are other techniques mentioned, like few-shot prompting.
Yeah, few shot. That's where you give the LLM a couple of examples of the output you want before you give it the real task.
So like showing it, here's what good looks like.
Exactly. Do it like this.
Yeah.
And then show it one or two examples. It helps it understand the pattern or style you're after.
Interesting. And what about chain of thought prompting?
Ah, chain of thought. That's asking the model to sort of think out loud.
How does that work?
You encourage it to lay out its reasoning, step by step, before giving the final answer. Really useful for complex problems.
Right, so you can see how it got there, not just the end result. Helps with trust, maybe? And debugging.
For sure.
Yeah.
And for making sure the reasoning itself is sound, not just the answer.
And then there are those settings we can adjust. Temperature and top up.
Yes, those are important knobs to turn. They basically control the randomness or creativity of the output.
So lower settings mean more predictable, focused answers.
Generally, yes. Sticking closer to the most probable words.
And higher settings. More creative, maybe surprising.
Exactly, but also potentially less coherent or more off the wall sometimes. It's a trade-off.
Okay, so we've got these basic prompt types, some techniques like few-shot and chain of thought, and these tuning settings.
Right. And that foundation is key because now we can talk about something really powerful. Prompt chaining.
Prompt chaining. Okay, this sounds like where things get interesting.
It really is. It sounds maybe a bit complex, but the idea is actually pretty simple.
Yeah, how so?
Think about a big, complicated project. You wouldn't do it all at once, right? You'd break it down.
Sure, into smaller steps, manageable chunks.
Yes, exactly. Prompt chaining is like that. But for LLM tasks, each step is its own prompt.
Ah, I see. So you're not trying to get the AI to do everything in one massive instruction.
Precisely. And the crucial part is the output from one prompt becomes the input for the next one.
Creating a chain,
Okay.
like an assembly line.
That's a great analogy. An assembly line for generating information or completing a complex task.
What are the big advantages here? Why do this?
Well, first off, it lets you tackle much more complex problems, step by step. Things that would totally confuse the LLM if you asked in one go.
Okay, complexity handling. What else?
It keeps the answers at each stage much more focused and organized. because each prompt is doing one specific thing.
Less room for error or going off track.
Right. It reduces confusion, makes the final output generally more reliable, more tailored.
Sounds really useful for building like proper workflows or even simple AI tools.
Definitely. Your sources actually gave a great concrete example, writing a research summary.
Okay, how would that work with chaining?
So instead of one giant prompt like, summarize this 50-page paper, you start smaller. Prompt 1 could be, read this paper and identify the 5 main arguments.
Okay, simple enough. Output. 5 bullet points, maybe.
Exactly. Then prompt 2 takes those 5 bullet points as input and asks, for each of these 5 arguments, write a short paragraph explaining it based on the paper.
Ah, okay. Now we're building detail, so the output is 5 paragraphs.
Yep. And you could continue the chain. Prompt 3 might take those paragraphs and say,
Synthesize these into a concise executive summary.
you got it, or turn these points into a LinkedIn post, like in the source example. Or write a conclusion with a call to action.
You see how each step builds logically on the last one? It creates a much more structured process.
Totally. Much better than just hoping for the best with one huge prompt.
So if you, our listener, want to try this chaining thing, any practical tips?
Definitely. First, keep each individual prompt, each link in the chain, very clear and focused on one small task.
Don't try to do too much in one step.
Exactly. And it's usually a good idea to save the output from each step before you move on.
Why is that? Just in case.
Yeah, just in case something goes wrong later. You don't want to have to start the whole chain over if, say, prompt 4 messes up. You can just go back to the output of prompt 3.
Smart, like checkpoints.
And review each output. Before you feed it into the next prompt, check it. Is it accurate? Is it what you wanted?
Makes sense. Quality control at each stage.
And the sources also mentioned, once you get the hang of it, you can look into automating these chains with scripts or tools, especially for repetitive workflows.
Right. Getting more advanced.
And here's a cool thought. Combine chaining with those other techniques. Imagine using a rolled test prompt for one step, then maybe a chain of thought for another part of the same overall task.
Ooh, yeah. Like having a research analyst persona summarize data in one step, then an expert copywriter persona turn it into marketing text in the next.
Exactly. That's where you can build some really sophisticated workflows.
Okay, so chaining is powerful, but we also need to talk about the flip side, the limitations of these LLMs.
Absolutely crucial.
Right.
This isn't about, finding fault with the tech. It's about understanding how it works best and avoiding frustration.
Setting realistic expectations.
Right. And the sources really hammer this home. Clarity and specificity in prompts are non-negotiable.
Because vague instructions lead to
Vague answers, or confusing ones, or just plain wrong ones. They aren't psychic. They can only work with what you give them.
And they're sensitive, aren't they, to wording?
Very sensitive. The order of words, the specific phrasing, even small changes can sometimes drastically alter the output.
So that prompt engineering skill really is about careful crafting and maybe some trial and error.
A lot of trial and error, often.
Then there's the H word, hallucination.
Ah, yes, hallucination. Sounds dramatic, but it just means the model generates stuff that sounds perfectly plausible, totally confident, but it's factually wrong.
Made up, essentially.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Or blending facts incorrectly.
Yeah.
It's why you always need to double-check any critical information an LLM gives you. Don't just trust it blindly.
Especially for important stuff. And another point, not all LLMs are the same.
Not at all. Models like GPT-4, Claude, Gemini, Llama, they're all trained differently on different data with different architectures.
So a prompt that works great on one might just flop on another.
It might, or give a very different kind of answer. There's no single magic prompt that works everywhere. You often need to adapt your prompts for the specific model you're using.
Good to know. What about bias? That comes up a lot with AI.
It's a major concern. These models learn from the vast amounts of test data they're trained on, and that data reflects self-human society, including our biases.
So the models can generate biased or unfair responses.
They certainly can. It's something developers are working hard on, but it's an ongoing challenge. Being aware of potential bias in the output is really important.
Okay, and let's circle back to those temperature and top settings. How do they fit into limitations?
Well, like we said, higher settings boost creativity.
Yeah.
But if you push them too high,
Things get weird.
things can get very weird, random, nonsensical, completely off topic. So using those settings requires finding a balance for your specific task.
And models have different strengths, too.
Yeah, definitely. Some are amazing conversationalists, great for chatbots. Others excel at writing code. Some are better at logical reasoning, others at creative writing or image analysis.
So choose the right tool for the job, basically. Don't expect a chatbot model to be the best code generator, maybe.
It's a good rule of thumb. Understand the model's intended strengths.
Anything else? What about errors?
One thing to watch out for is that they can sometimes get stuck in a loop, repeating an incorrect pattern or fact.
If they make a mistake once.
And you don't correct or guide them away from it in your next prompt, they might just keep repeating that same mistake. They learn from the conversation history, including the errors sometimes.
Right. Which really brings us back to a key idea. This is iterative.
Absolutely. Effective prompt engineering is almost never about getting it perfect on the first try.
It's a process.
It's a process of testing, seeing what you get, tweaking the prompt, maybe rephrasing, trying again, observing how the model reacts until you zero in on the result you need.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. We've covered quite a bit.
We have. We looked at those core prompting ideas: clarity, context, roles, giving good basic instructions.
Then we dove into prompt chaining, that powerful idea of breaking big tasks into smaller, linked steps.
Yeah, using the output of one prompt as the input for the next really unlocks complex tasks.
And crucially, we talked about being realistic, understanding the limitations, things like sensitivity to wording, hallucination, bias, model differences.
Knowing those limitations is just as important as knowing the techniques, really. It helps you prompt smarter and safer.
So the big picture for you, our listener, is that by getting a handle on these principles, clear prompts, chaining, limitations, you can really level up how you interact with LLMs.
Definitely. You move from just asking simple questions to actually directing these powerful tools much more effectively.
Unlocking their potential for learning, for creativity, for solving problems, but doing it in a more informed way.
Exactly. Which leads to a good question for you to think about.
Oh, yeah.
Consider some complex project or task you're working on, or just something you could work on. How might you apply this idea of prompt chaining? Breaking it down into a sequence of prompts for an LLM to help with, step by step. What would those steps look like?
That's a great practical exercise. And maybe another thought. Now that you're more aware of the limitations, like hallucination or bias, where will you be extra careful? What kinds of information generated by an LLM will you make sure to scrutinize or verify more closely?
Good point. It's about becoming that critical, informed user.
For sure. We've really just scratched the surface today, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely. As your sources hinted, there's a whole world of more advanced stuff, tools for building assistants.
Yeah, things we definitely hope to dig into in future deep dives. Lots more to explore here.